Hi, I'm Patrick. Today we look at Instagram feeds that cropped out the danger for the aesthetic. From a travel creator running along a cliff edge until his drone captured something horrifying, to a mother holding her baby near a 7th floor window for the perfect soft light photo, only for it to end in an image no one would ever forget. It was August 15th, 2016. Along the western edge of Portugal's Atlantic coastline, the cliffs north of a popular scenic overlook looked calm beneath the soft gold light of early morning. Tomás Ferreira, 28, was a graphic designer from northern Portugal who ran a small travel Instagram page focused on cinematic drone footage. As his audience slowly grew, he began chasing more dramatic locations and increasingly complex shots, often prioritizing framing over situational awareness. After teaching himself aerial filming online, he visited a coastal trail he believed would work for a sunrise reel and returned early the next morning with his drone following him in tracking mode. You can kind of picture him thinking more about how it would look on screen than anything else around him. The trail section was unstable due to winter erosion, which had hollowed out parts of the outer edge beneath grass and scrub, making the ground appear more solid than it was. There were no railings or warning signs. Investigators later concluded he likely only scouted the area from a distance and did not inspect the most eroded sections up close. He jogged along the trail, eyes fixed on his phone as he watched the drone's live feed. The drone kept up with him, but it drifted a little now and then, correcting itself as it followed the uneven coastline. The shot stayed mostly steady. He never looked up from the screen. As the trail curved slightly left, his right foot landed on the weakened outer edge. The ground fractured beneath him, first cracking and tilting outward before the support fully gave way. He lost balance as the edge collapsed, and his body dropped out of frame in a rapid but not instantaneous motion, disappearing from view within a second. The drone briefly hovered as it lost tracking, attempting to reacquire the subject. With no movement detected and wind affecting stability near the cliff edge, it remained momentarily stationary before initiating its automatic return to home sequence due to low battery. Even the drone kinda notices something is wrong, but it doesn't understand what it's seeing. The fall measured more than 330 feet onto exposed rocks near the shoreline. A couple walking along a lower coastal route spotted what they initially believed was discarded clothing among the rocks below and contacted emergency services. Due to the steep terrain and inaccessible shoreline, maritime rescue units were deployed after initial location confirmation. Crews reached the area by boat later that morning once sea conditions allowed a safe approach to the rocky base of the cliffs. He had died immediately from catastrophic injuries sustained during impact. The post-mortem examination concluded that the cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma from an extreme height fall. Both legs had fractured on impact, along with extensive pelvic and rib destruction. Severe internal injuries included ruptures to major organs and collapsed lungs. A major skull fracture indicated secondary impact against exposed rock after the initial landing. Toxicology reports found no alcohol or drugs in his system. Authorities retained the drone footage as part of the investigation and did not publicly release it. However, a short leaked segment circulated online months later before being removed from most platforms. Temporary fencing was later installed along the damaged section of trail, followed by permanent barriers the next year. The final image saved in his Instagram drafts was never posted. It showed him running toward the sunrise, the Atlantic stretching out behind him, perfectly framed, taken just moments before the ground ahead gave way into the cliff edge. After what happened, things don't really feel any safer when more people are involved. This time, it's a group on an abandoned pier where the structure itself was already holding on by very little. It was April 2017. On a barrier island along the South Carolina coast, an abandoned wooden fishing pier stretched into the Atlantic beneath the dim light before sunrise. A group of 8 college students had planned an early morning trip to the closed pier to take a final Instagram photo together before the semester ended. Among them were 20-year-old Delia Marchetti, an environmental studies student known for organizing outings and group events, and 21-year-old Owen Price, a biology major who had privately admitted to friends that he was uncomfortable in deep water and not a strong swimmer. The group had connected through classes and social media, often meeting for beach photos, sunrise gatherings, and shared Instagram posts documenting campus life. Just a group of friends trying to make one of those last memories together, moments that feels important in the moment. The pier had been officially closed for years after inspections found severe structural decay from saltwater and tidal erosion, especially near its far end. Warning signs were posted at the entrance, but there were no physical barriers, and the group entered anyway. One student even photographing the sign and posting it to Instagram with a joking caption about ignoring rules. Before dawn, they walked the full length of the unstable pier using phone flashlights, stepping over missing planks and warped decking as the structure creaked under their combined weight. Near the end, they set up a phone on an old tackle box with a timer so all 8 could be captured together in a single Instagram photo at sunrise. As the horizon brightened, all 8 students crowded onto the final section of the pier and posed near the railing. Investigators later determined that the combined weight placed intense pressure on support pilings already weakened by rot and cracking beneath the waterline. Without warning, one of the heavily degraded support pilings failed, triggering a rapid chain reaction of structural overload. The far end of the pier began to shift and sag as adjacent supports immediately lost load-bearing capacity. Witness footage later recovered from the recording phone showed the far end of the pier suddenly dropping as several supports gave way one after another. Sections of decking and railing broke apart as it collapsed, falling into the surf along with the students. All 8 ended up in the water, surrounded by broken wood and debris. Owen Price was struck by collapsing decking and became trapped beneath submerged sections of the pier, pinned in broken timber as it settled into the water. Delia Marchetti resurfaced but immediately struggled to breathe after inhaling water during the collapse. Witnesses later said she appeared disoriented and panicked in the rough surf before losing consciousness as rescue crews attempted to reach her. Other students tried to help, but the broken pier, incoming tide, and rough surf made it too dangerous to reach them. Owen drowned under the debris before dive teams could safely get in, while Delia lost consciousness in the water before rescue boats arrived. Rescue crews pulled the remaining students from the surf, with injuries ranging from hypothermia and deep lacerations to fractures and shoulder injuries. Delia was transported to a nearby hospital, but was later pronounced dead. Medical findings confirmed Owen died from drowning complicated by traumatic injuries sustained during the collapse. Delia's cause of death was determined to be respiratory failure associated with water aspiration and cold water immersion before loss of consciousness. The recording phone survived and captured the final seconds before the collapse. Investigators later reviewed the footage during proceedings regarding the pier's closure and lack of enforced barriers. Months later, the remaining structure was demolished. The final image in the phone's gallery showed 8 students smiling at sunrise on a section of pier later confirmed to have been structurally compromised at the time. After that, it's hard to look at just a photo location the same way again. The next story is something more contained, where the environment itself was already going wrong before anything even started. It was October 2018. In Nashville's Wedgwood-Houston district, a converted warehouse housed a rentable commercial kitchen space used for private food shoots and small productions. Cassidy Wren was 27. A dental hygienist from Murfreesboro, who ran a small Instagram account focused on styled food photography she called Midnight Hosting. With just over 2,000 followers, she treated it as a creative portfolio rather than a pursuit of virality, often renting commercial kitchens for controlled lighting and overhead shots. She was familiar with the facility and had used it multiple times before. She feels like someone doing this very intentionally, not for attention, just for the satisfaction of getting the shot right. Based on my findings, everything here looks normal on the surface, but the place itself isn't fully in good condition. Unbeknownst to her, the kitchen's refrigeration system had developed a slow ammonia leak days earlier. Maintenance staff had identified the issue and partially shut down the walk-in unit, but the damaged line was left unrepaired, allowing gas to continue seeping into the enclosed space. The odor built gradually, sharp and chemical, resembling strong cleaning agents. At first, it was mild enough to be dismissed as recent sanitation work, but it became increasingly irritating as she remained inside the space. Cassidy arrived that evening with props, ingredients, and camera gear for a candlelit shoot. She noticed a strange smell but assumed it was just from recent cleaning, so she started setting up anyway. Partway through filming, she turned off the ventilation to cut down on noise, which meant the room's air stopped moving much. At first, she kept working, but she started pausing more often, rubbing her eyes and clearing her throat as the irritation slowly got worse and harder to ignore. As time passed, ammonia levels in the enclosed kitchen steadily rose. Her reactions became more pronounced: persistent coughing, blinking fits, and repeated wiping of her eyes. By midnight, she was no longer working continuously. She sat on the floor between takes, then stood again to resume filming. Her eyes were visibly red on camera, but she continued working, focused on completing the set. By early morning hours, her condition had deteriorated significantly. The footage shows unsteady movement, longer pauses between actions, and moments where she steadied herself against the counter. She knocked a small dish off the table and did not immediately respond to it. She then walked toward her camera setup, paused briefly, and collapsed forward onto the tiled floor without bracing, consistent with acute hypoxic deterioration and loss of motor control. The kitchen remained empty and unmonitored. Her scheduled Instagram reel posted automatically early the next morning. It showed a polished overhead video of the finished spread, lit by soft candlelight and edited with calm music. Early viewers assumed it was a routine aesthetic post, and engagement began as normal. Not long after, her roommate, unable to reach her after repeated attempts, contacted the facility and then requested a welfare check. Emergency responders arrived shortly afterward and immediately detected a strong chemical odor outside the building. Fire and hazmat crews entered with respiratory protection and confirmed dangerously high ammonia concentrations inside the kitchen. Cassidy was found on the floor near the prep station, unresponsive but with signs of life when discovered by emergency responders. She was transported to a nearby hospital where she died later that morning without regaining consciousness. The autopsy confirmed acute respiratory failure caused by severe ammonia inhalation injury. The chemical had destroyed the lining of her airway from nasal passages through the lungs, leaving heavy, fluid-filled lungs consistent with toxic exposure. Minor injuries from the collapse were present but not fatal. The reel remained online briefly before being removed by her family. The facility was later shut down and the leak traced to unresolved maintenance failures involving the refrigeration line. The next case feels like a different kind of risk, but it still comes down to trusting a space that isn't as safe as it looks. It was July 2015. In Medellin's El Poblado district, a boutique hotel rooftop sat above the city's steep hillsides, where infinity pools were often photographed against the skyline at sunset. Valentina Rios was 24, a junior graphic designer working at a small advertising agency in the city. She had under 2,000 Instagram followers and posted casual lifestyle and street photography rather than curated influencer content. She had booked the hotel rooftop after seeing a photo online that showed a person standing at the pool's edge with the city dropping away behind them. She planned the shot in advance, choosing late afternoon light for the skyline glow, and went alone after her friend canceled. The rooftop had an infinity pool that spilled into a narrow drain along the edge. A low decorative wall about 16 inches high separated it from a steep drop to the street below. The floor was smooth porcelain tile made more for looks than grip, and it got very slippery when wet, especially where water was constantly overflowing. It's more designed for appearance than movement or safety. Valentina set up a small tripod and used a remote shutter to frame the skyline behind her, recreating an online image of someone standing at the pool's edge with the city dropping away in the background. She adjusted her position while checking composition on her phone, standing on an already wet tile. At the same time, other guests moved through the rooftop area, including a child who ran to the pool and jumped in. The splash added to the ongoing overflow, sending a brief surge across the surface that spread unevenly over the wet tile toward the edge where Valentina was standing. The change was almost imperceptible at first. Then, within a moment, the surface beneath her feet lost all traction. Her feet lost traction almost simultaneously, sliding on the wet tile as her center of mass shifted backward. The sudden loss of friction created a split-second imbalance she could not correct. The low parapet wall made brief contact with her midsection, momentarily deflecting her motion, but her momentum carried her past it before any recovery was possible. The motion continued without interruption, and she went over the edge in a single continuous fall. Rooftop security footage later showed the entire sequence from the pool splash to her disappearance over the parapet occurring in just over a second. The child resurfaced moments later, turning toward the noise of distant shouting without understanding what had just occurred behind him. The footage makes it feel very fast, almost hard to process because it happens in one continuous motion. Emergency services were called immediately by hotel staff and guests who witnessed the aftermath. Responders arrived quickly, but confirmed obvious fatal injuries upon reaching the street level below. Valentina died from severe injuries caused by a high fall. The medical exam later confirmed the impact was instantly fatal, with major internal injuries and broken bones consistent with an uncontrolled fall backwards. Investigators later noted that the combination of constant overflow, low friction tile, and minimal barrier height created a hazardous environment that offered no recovery margin once balance was lost. The rooftop pool was temporarily closed following the incident, and the hotel underwent safety review and structural modification. The edge area was resurfaced with higher grip materials, and additional protective barriers were installed along the perimeter to restrict direct access to the drop zone. Valentina's phone was recovered, with the final images still saved in its gallery, including the last frame she had been composing before the accident. At her family's request, none of the photos were released publicly. From a space where movement is open and fast, we move into something much more enclosed, where even small changes in visibility can completely change the outcome. It was June 2017. In Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, a hidden cenote cave system stretched beneath the jungle, where flooded limestone passages connected sinkholes and submerged tunnels that shifted from mapped tourist sites to undocumented voids. Marco Delgado was 26. A freelance videographer from Guadalajara traveling through the region to build adventure content for his Instagram and YouTube channel. He had a few thousand followers and no sponsorship, funding his trip through small commercial video work. He had a basic scuba certification, limited open water experience, and no cave diving training, but he was still filming cenotes and underwater passages for social media. He had been told about an unmarked cave tunnel, locally known as La Aguja, which other travelers casually described as tight but possible, without really emphasizing the risks. He and a friend entered a cenote that morning and descended into an underwater limestone opening that quickly narrowed into a confined horizontal passage. Marco went first, pushing a GoPro rig ahead of him as he entered a tight restriction that reduced to barely wider than his shoulders, leaving minimal clearance for his tank as he advanced. Within minutes, visibility began to collapse. The disturbed silt turned the water opaque, eliminating all visual reference points. Marco stopped moving forward, but became partially wedged in the restriction, his tank unable to clear the narrowing ceiling as his body lost the ability to rotate or reverse. As he struggled, his breathing got fast and uneven, which made him use up air more quickly and made it harder for him to stay in control in the tight space. The enclosed tunnel made every movement feel bigger and harder to manage, and before long, he couldn't see anything at all in the water. The camera footage later recovered shows his attempts to push backward against the rock walls while trapped at an angle that prevented his tank from clearing the ceiling. His breathing grows faster and more erratic as he tries to reposition himself in near total darkness. The footage is basically just repeated attempts to adjust in a space that doesn't give enough room to reset properly. His air supply still contained usable pressure, indicating he had not exhausted his breathing gas before losing consciousness. Investigators noted that panic, restricted movement, and rapid exertion in the confined space likely caused him to lose control and become physically unable to continue breathing effectively, despite still having remaining air. After several minutes, Marco's breathing slows and then stops. The regulator briefly releases a final burst of air before going silent. His partner retreats from the passage and surfaces to call for help. A professional cave rescue team later entered the tunnel after a delayed response window and recovered Marco still wedged in the same position. His air supply still contained usable pressure, confirming he had not run out of oxygen before he died. Even after rescue efforts, the physical conditions inside the passage don't change what already happened there. The autopsy confirmed drowning due to immersion in a confined underwater environment, with contributing factors including entrapment and loss of consciousness before gas depletion. There were minor abrasions on his hands from contact with limestone. Toxicology was negative. Investigators concluded that panic, exhaustion, and restricted movement led to drowning even though breathable air remained available. An automated social media post from his account went live the following day through a scheduled upload system, showing calm underwater footage from an earlier dive in the trip. It was captioned as part of his travel series and received more engagement than any of his previous uploads. His account was later removed at the request of his family. Now we jump into an abandoned industrial site where things that look stable on the outside aren't actually stable at all. It was September 2016. On the industrial outskirts of Huelva, Spain, a long-abandoned phosphoric acid processing plant stood behind broken fencing and weathered warning signs, its concrete structures still holding the residue of decades of chemical production. That kind of place already feels heavy, just from how it looks like nothing there ever fully reset back to normal. Adrian Vega was 23. A warehouse worker from Andalusia who spent weekends exploring abandoned industrial sites and posting his photography on Instagram. With fewer than 1,000 followers, he wasn't commercializing his work, he was documenting decay. He had experience exploring derelict buildings, but no formal training in hazardous environments, and he had visited dozens of sites without incident. For this visit, he was accompanied by two friends, Ruben Castillo, a mechanic, and Iria Montero, an architecture student on her first exploration trip. The group entered the site through a gap in the perimeter fence and moved through several dark, deteriorating service rooms without issue. Eventually, they reached a large processing hall where shallow liquid covered the floor in a smooth, reflective layer, mirroring the corroded beams and ceiling above. The scene was the kind of industrial reflection photo Adrienne had seen online, and was trying to recreate. At first glance, the liquid didn't look dangerous. The space had a faint, sharp, unusual smell, but he dismissed it as old, stagnant water mixed with rust. Adrian prepared his camera setup near the doorway and tested framing angles drawn to the symmetry of the reflections. Believing the liquid to be shallow, he removed his protective considerations and stepped into the room to capture a central composition directly within the reflective surface. Within moments, he was fully exposed to the contaminated material. The liquid was not water, but long-standing industrial runoff from the abandoned phosphoric acid processing system, containing residual acidic compounds and contaminated byproducts that had accumulated over years of exposure and decay. Contact caused immediate irritation and chemical burning to the skin. The injury began as a progressive reaction rather than instant catastrophic destruction. At first, it was intense stinging and redness, which quickly escalated into worsening pain and early tissue damage as the chemicals continued to react with moisture on the skin. As he tried to stand, the slick, contaminated surface reduced traction, causing repeated slips that increased contact time and spread exposure across his lower body. Rubain tried to reach him, but backed off when the liquid started damaging his shoes. Adrian staggered toward the exit, but each step got harder as the pain increased and his skin kept breaking down. By the time they pulled him out, large areas of his legs and lower body were badly burned with blistering and peeling skin, and he was struggling to breathe from inhaling toxic fumes in the enclosed space. Emergency services were called, but the remote location delayed response. By the time he reached hospital care, he was in critical condition, with extensive chemical burns and significant airway injury from inhalation exposure. He died several hours later without regaining consciousness. The distance from help matters a lot here. Everything takes longer than it should. Medical examination confirmed that prolonged chemical contact combined with inhalation of acidic vapors led to progressive tissue destruction, systemic shock, and respiratory failure. The burns were extensive and severe, but consistent with sustained exposure rather than instantaneous full-thickness destruction. Toxic inhalation had caused significant damage to the airway and lungs, contributing to irreversible respiratory collapse. His companions survived with non-fatal chemical injuries and provided statements to investigators. Authorities later confirmed the site contained long-standing hazardous chemical residues that had never been fully neutralized after decommissioning. The property owner was fined for environmental negligence. Adrian's final Instagram post, uploaded days earlier, showed a quiet abandoned structure at sunset with a caption about forgotten places. His account remained publicly visible for over a year before being discovered by his family. Now we proceed to a quiet residential apartment, where something ordinary and familiar turns risky in a matter of seconds. It was the 6th of March 2015. In a quiet residential neighborhood in Porto, Portugal, warm afternoon sunlight spilled through the upper floors of an aging apartment building lined with outward opening windows. Renata Souza, 31, was a pharmacy assistant on maternity leave raising her infant son alone in a 7th floor apartment. She kept a small Instagram account as a personal scrapbook for family and close friends, mostly sharing photos of her child taken in soft, natural light near the apartment window. Friends described her as careful and structured, someone who planned her routines in advance and avoided unnecessary risks. A few days earlier, she had seen an online photo of a toddler sitting on a European-style windowsill with a city skyline in the background. Inspired by the composition, she decided to recreate a similar image using the afternoon light in her own apartment. The building's older casement windows opened fully outward and did not have safety guards, exposing a narrow exterior stone ledge several stories above the street. That Saturday afternoon, she opened the window and carefully positioned her son at the inner edge of the sill while keeping close physical contact. She adjusted his placement and framed the shot within arm's reach, ensuring he remained secure as she composed the photograph in the natural window light. The child remained calm as she adjusted her position within arm's reach of the window, carefully framing the shot so both him and the distant rooftops were visible behind him. She took several photos while staying close, maintaining both visual focus and physical proximity. In one of them, he looked directly toward her and smiled. According to her family, she later intended to upload that image to Instagram later that day. Moments later, the child shifted sideways while reaching toward the open frame. The movement was small, but enough to pull his balance toward the edge. Renata reacted instantly, lunging forward and grabbing him around the torso before he could slip. She pulled him back against the window frame, but in doing so, she overextended beyond the sill. A split-second instinct takes over here, no time to think through anything. just reaction. With her weight shifted forward and both arms extended, she couldn't steady herself. She tipped out through the open window and fell 7 stories onto the stone pavement below. Witnesses reported hearing a scream, followed by the impact seconds later. Nearby residents rushed outside and alerted emergency services, while one neighbor entered the apartment to secure the child after hearing him cry near the open window. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the injuries were catastrophic and unsurvivable. The post-mortem examination determined the cause of death as severe blunt force trauma from a high fall, including multiple spinal fractures, extensive internal hemorrhage, bilateral pneumothoraces from rib fractures, and a traumatic rupture of the aorta, along with severe skull fractures from secondary impact. Death would have occurred almost immediately upon impact. The report reads cold and clinical, like it can only describe the physical reality and nothing more. Her son was found alive and physically unharmed inside the apartment near the window and was later placed into the care of relatives. Hours later, a previously scheduled Instagram post was automatically published through a third-party tool showing the child smiling in soft window light. The post was removed shortly after by family members. Following the incident, window guards were installed in several upper-floor apartments after residents raised safety concerns.